Since 2015, Jared Stillman has rocked Nashville sports.
That team freaking stinks.
And now he's back. The takes are hotter than ever.
I mean, let's be honest, he just can't coach.
Welcome to Stillman and Company.
Stillman and Company of the 440 Sports Network, presented by Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical, live today from Concord, New Hampshire. That's right, where I got my career started, here in Concord at WKXL. I actually am going to go down memory lane here at some point today. This weekend, we spent remembering the great Dave Bonner, who was probably the first person to ever truly believe in me in this industry, who helped me get my first shot here at WKXL in New Hampshire. He passed away earlier this month. His funeral was yesterday. His burial was today. It was a military-style burial, and it was very sad, but very uplifting at the same time. So that's why we're in New Hampshire today. We can do the show here today, then fly back to Nashville later tonight. I'm probably going to watch a movie, even though I've been binging The Sopranos. I think I need to watch a movie on the flight. Who knows? But I'll be flying back to Nashville today. We'll be back at the Stillman & Company studios tomorrow. That's right. We got a lot to get into, though. The Tennessee Titans are officially, unofficially going to be hosting the Super Bowl. Plus, boy, a big fallout from the Ramon Foster stuff. We'll get into that. Plus, there is something new on the Dianna Russini front, which we'll touch on. And I am going here in New Hampshire. I do want to take just a little trip down good old memory lane and to maybe talk about a side of myself that I don't know if people really know about. And we'll do all of that. First, though, I do want to tell you about Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. They take great care of my home. Hiller can do the exact same for you. Hiller has been taking care of my home for years. That's right. Anytime we have an issue, we call Hiller. They come right in, they get it done. And it's not even an issue like, oh, wow, this faucet is screwed up. Come in, Hiller. They do that. But it's also like, we want to move this outlet over here. Hiller. I just pull out my phone, I go to happyhiller.com, and I just schedule the appointment right from there. It takes probably 2 minutes. Then the next day, they give you a 2-hour window when they're coming out. You get a notification on your phone. You can track the driver. He comes, they take great care of your home. I know this because I've been using Hiller forever. So use them like I do. That's Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical, proud supporters of the Preds, the Vols, and Vandy. That's Hiller. Call the Happy Face Truck today. Okay, we here in Nashville are going to be a Super Bowl city. Now, Dan Patrick reported this weeks ago, and I believe that every single insider this morning that put out there, breaking news, the owners' meetings are this week. Sources say Nashville's going to be awarded the 2030 Super Bowl. Should all have to say that Dan Patrick had it first, because Dan Patrick did have it first. And now it's going to become official at the owners' meetings. They're going to vote on it. This is like Congress. If you don't have the votes for something, you don't bring it up for a vote. So there is no chance that the Tennessee Titans and that the city of Nashville is not going to be awarded the Super Bowl in 2030, which means officially we are a Super Bowl town. Now, I have a bunch of thoughts for this. Number one, my first thought is, with the insiders, you all owe an acknowledgement to Dan Patrick, because you guys care about who gets what scoop. You guys are sleeping with people for scoops. You guys are buddying up to people for scoops. So if the scoop is so important, you owe Dan Patrick an acknowledgement saying Dan had it first, because Dan did have it first. Also, I saw all the insiders this weekend. Breaking news, Aaron Rodgers signs with the Steelers. I'm like, that's great. We already did. Can you tell me what took so fucking long? Insiders? Or do we just copy and paste text messages we get from agents and teams? That's first thing. So get that out of the way. The second thing, when it comes to us hosting the Super Bowl, and this is where it's going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but I really do mean it on one hand and mean it on the other hand. The first thing is, no shit, we're getting the Super Bowl. We're building a $2 billion stadium. That's part of the deal. The reality is Nissan Stadium was built so cheaply. The original Nissan Stadium in the 1990s was built so cheaply that in order to make it a first-class facility, which was required by the lease that the city had to give the Titans in order to get them to move from Houston and not pick a different city, like, say, Memphis, to go to, it would have cost roughly $1 billion to do, because you would have had to take the current Nissan Stadium and take everything that's screwed up about it, take that out, build it back, and you would have essentially had to build a new stadium anyways. This, with the dome, allows there to be certainty with scheduling, so that when you schedule a Garth Brooks concert, there will be a Garth Brooks concert. So that when you schedule something, CMA Fest, it's not going to be interrupted by a thunderstorm and half the people are going to get upset because Brad Paisley plays one song. That is what they're now going to avoid. That's what everybody wants to avoid. That's why everybody's building a dome stadium. But when you build a dome stadium, you get the Super Bowl. Everybody who builds a dome stadium gets the Super Bowl. Minnesota got the Super Bowl. Detroit got the Super Bowl. Jacksonville upgraded their stadium and got a Super Bowl. So once you build the stadium, once you use the taxpayer dollars to build the stadium, you get the Super Bowl. Vegas got the Super Bowl. Cleveland is building a dome stadium. They'll get the Super Bowl. If you build a dome stadium or you build a new stadium with really, really good outdoor weather, you'll get the Super Bowl. So it's not like this idea of, wow, way to go, Titans, way to go, Amy, way to go, Burke, which they undoubtedly will do once it becomes official. It's not like I think that's any grand accomplishment, because you build a $2 billion stadium with the roof, you get one Super Bowl. That's how it works. I mean, when Dan Patrick brought this up weeks ago or a month ago or whenever it was, and Dan Patrick was saying, yeah, I'm hearing the 2030 Super Bowl is going to be in Nashville. I thought, well, that makes sense. We now know the stadium's going to be completed in time for the 2027 season. They want you to have a full season in that stadium before they give you a Super Bowl, just so that they know the stadium's not going to fall down. Then they can test everything else out. So 2030 makes sense. But I knew we were getting the Super Bowl. This was part of the discussion from the start, remember? When they were talking about, with a dome stadium, we'll get the Super Bowl, we'll get the Final Four, we'll get WrestleMania, we'll get... So, big deal, we got, okay. But on the other hand, and this is where it's going to sound like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth, I still remember as a little kid running down the house at our home in West Nashville that at that point in time couldn't have cost more than $200,000. Good luck finding anything for $200,000 in Nashville nowadays. But I remember running down because I was watching a White Sox game on WGN. And the White Sox AAA affiliate was the Nashville Sounds. And there was a player, I guess, that had been called up to the White Sox, and I'm watching the game, and Hawk Harrelson's Tom Paciorek, they're calling it, and they said, yeah, so-and-so, he was at AAA Nashville, and the 6-year-old me, the 7-year-old me, I can't even remember how old, I run down the hallway, I'm like, Dad, they just said Nashville on WGN on the White Sox broadcast. And to contrast that with, we're getting the Super Bowl, that's pretty freaking cool. I think our minds, when it comes to money, it's kind of become distorted a little bit, if that makes any sense. Like how we spend money as a government or as a society. I saw some rail in China that apparently it's these really sweet trains that they have in China. I don't really know much about it, but somebody said on social media, and it was Twitter, so who knows if it's true or not, you can't really build that in the United States because the amount of tax money that it would cost to build this kind of railway is so expensive that there's no way you could get people to want to do it. And when it comes to money with all things in life, I think the real question sometimes isn't about, okay, where could we better spend our money, or, oh, where are we going broke with our money? But I think sometimes it's, what do we want to use our money on? And when it comes to a sports team, every single one of these economists will tell you, you never get your money back that you give the sports team. That when they come in and they say, build us a stadium and you will make a fortune, this will be great for the city. Jobs, property value, events, they'll pack the bars, the restaurants, the tax dollars, and every economist, I think it's like universally accepted, says, that's kind of bullshit. And yet, on the other hand, I remember running down the house saying, oh my God, they talked about us. Then we gave the Houston Oilers an incredible deal to move to Nashville. It was such a sweet deal that we had to build them a $2.2 billion stadium in order to keep them from really sticking it up our rear ends and into our property taxes by demanding a first-class facility, which, again, was part of the deal. Well, in order to get the Oilers, we had to give them a great deal. There wasn't anything inherently incredible about Nashville. Again, the only place that can just cross their arms and say, you build it, is Los Angeles. And that's because the NFL was so desperate to be in the second largest media market in America. We in Nashville, we ain't Los Angeles. And let's not pretend like we're Los Angeles. So we had to give the Titans a great deal to move here. They did. Then we had to give the Titans a new stadium to keep them here. We did. And so I keep thinking about what we were before we had the NFL, before we had the NHL. I spent almost no time downtown as a kid. I remember we would go to the Melting Pot on 2nd Avenue for my sister's birthday every year. And I remember walking around downtown being like, this is a shithole. Downtown was a shithole. People weren't moving to Nashville. It wasn't like this great kept secret in America like it was when I was in high school. We didn't have pro sports. I tell people this all the time. This is why I'm such a big Atlanta Braves fan. Because we didn't have pro sports. We had Vanderbilt, who was terrible at everything, Tennessee, who was 4 hours away, and the Atlanta Braves were on TBS. That was it. I mean, again, we had AAA baseball and we had, minor league hockey, but I'm talking about the big stuff. We didn't have any of that. And then all of a sudden we built a football stadium and we built an arena and we had an NFL team and we had an NHL team. And then that arena started picking up even bigger events, like, say, the CMA Awards. And now that is one of the top entertainment districts in the world. And I don't think that comes to be if we don't invest in bringing the NFL to Nashville. The NFL draft was such a success in 2019 here. I believe that started a lot of the momentum for what we're seeing today as far as the NFL and their desire to put a Super Bowl here, though they would have put a Super Bowl here no matter what because we're building a stadium. But I think it made a lot of people believe, hey, Nashville can do this now. The Stanley Cup final in 2017 was a big motivational boost for the city. I guess what I'm saying is I understand that when it comes to the bottom line, building stadiums for teams is never going to be a net positive. You're not going to be richer because you built a team a stadium. But aren't you, in some cases, aren't you going to be happier about it? I am a happier person because the Houston Oilers moved to Tennessee when I was 8 years old. I'm a happier person because I grew up a Titan fan. Now, I can also argue that I've had a lot of pain being a Tennessee Titan fan, including recently. But I love my football team, and I love my city. And I don't know if my city is as popular as it is today if it's not for the football team. And when I say popular, I own real estate. I bought my first home in 2018. And I remember when I bought that home, and I remember thinking, my God, this is the top of the market. I can't believe I'm paying this much money for a home. Oh my God. And the value has doubled. Is that because of the NFL team? Maybe not. But I certainly think having an NFL team has certainly helped propel us as a city. I remember talking to Hal Gill, and he said when he played here, Nashville didn't have the restaurant scene that it has now. Well, now it does. And all we ever hear about is how broke the city is. And I don't understand why, but the property taxes seem to go up every single year to the point that it's kind of embarrassing now, where I'm like, okay, wait a minute, hold on. How did we go from 4,500 to 7,600? Somebody explain that one to me. But it is going to be cool that we have the Super Bowl in our town, our city. See, Jackson is never going to understand. Mike's son, he's never going to understand what it was like when you could buy a 3-acre home in Belmead for $800,000. He'll never know that life. You want to buy a 3-acre home in Belmead? It'll cost you $6 million at least. But it's a different city. And I think it's really cool. So as I said, on one hand, I'm not sitting here throwing a parade for the Titans because we're getting the Super Bowl. We paid for that. It's $2.2 billion. We paid for it. But I do look back on all of this, and this is where I give a lot of credit to Phil Bredesen. I look back on this, and I'm like, wow, look at us in Nashville, Tennessee. Little old Nashville, Tennessee. My dad was in the Air National Guard. And when he went to boot camp in Texas, he had somebody in his group ask him, do you people wear shoes? Seriously. And now we're going to have the Super Bowl here. I think it's incredible. The other thing, too, when it comes to the Super Bowl, like I said, there's going to be a lot of people when it becomes official that are like, oh my God, we got a Super Bowl. Way to go, Titans. Way to go, Amy. Way to go. And I'm like, that's what the $2.2 billion was for. We bought that. Everybody gets one Super Bowl. Again, Detroit got a Super Bowl. The key is, can we keep getting the Super Bowl? Vegas put on a very good Super Bowl a couple of years ago. They're going to keep getting it. LA apparently put on a good enough Super Bowl because they're getting it this year. And they just had it with Joe Burrow and the Rams. So they're going to get it again. And there's going to be a lot of competition to be in the rotation. New Orleans is in the rotation. Vegas, with their Super Bowl a couple of years ago, they got themselves in the rotation. LA is in the rotation. Miami has been taken out of the rotation. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of stadiums that get built here in the future that I think are going to get one-offs that'll kind of screw up the rotation a little bit. Atlanta, I think, wants to be in the rotation. I think they're getting a second Super Bowl. We have to do a good job with the first Super Bowl in order to get into the rotation. I think we will. But that's the key. And the key is to have the media, when they come here, to all sit there and say, God, I love that Super Bowl in Nashville. The same way everybody from the NFL said, God, I love that draft that we had in Nashville. That's what has to happen. Is we have got to, and this is a city leader thing, this is a Titan thing, this is an NFL thing, but we've got to do a great job hosting the Super Bowl. San Francisco got their second Super Bowl last year. They had the original Peyton Manning versus the Panthers in Super Bowl 50. They had last year Super Bowl 60. I would be shocked if the NFL goes back to Santa Clara anytime soon, just because everything was so spread out between San Jose and downtown San Francisco at the convention center. And there were unions involved with making things much tougher on the NFL. And then the game was in Santa Clara, and the media bitched incessantly about what it was like for the Super Bowl, and I just don't think the NFL is going to go. So we got to have a good Super Bowl. I think we will have a good Super Bowl, but that's the key, is to get into the rotation. Get into the rotation where it's here once every 7 or 8 years, and you'll make, as a city, a shitload of money, I think. You'll probably never make enough money to make it all back, because every economist under the sun says you don't do that, but you will, I think, get back in the rotation. That's the key here. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the state of the football team when it comes to that Super Bowl in 2030, which is the 2029 Super Bowl. You see, the Titans have been moving the goalposts for forever. And this, again, goes back to when they fired John Robinson. They were at 7-5. They were in first place in the division. Now, I couldn't believe that they fired a general manager who had won 61% of his games and had never, ever had a losing season and was not having a losing season and was in first place of the division at the time, because even though they had made some really bad choices, the A.J. Brown trade was a bad choice. The draft picks for Caleb Farley and Isaiah Wilson and Dylan Radins were bad choices. Even though they had done that, the free agent contract for Bud Dupree was not looking very good because Dupree was always hurt. Julio Jones was a bust. I get all that. But at the end of the day, the job is to win. And it's to compete for championships. The old man, Floyd Reese, used to say the goal of an NFL team is to compete for the playoffs. And every year the Titans were competing for the playoffs. But that wasn't good enough. Because when you fire your general manager, you're saying that's not good enough. Being the number one seed in the playoffs and losing in the divisional round, not good enough. Getting to the AFC Championship, not good enough. Winning the division back-to-back years, not good enough. Being in first place in the division, not good enough. That is what you're saying, regardless of whether or not you believe that. And since then, because that was so stupid, that line of thinking was so detached from how the NFL works, it was so impulsive, the Titans have been chasing those decisions ever since. And they've been moving the goalpost. For the last couple of years, everyone's been saying, hey, it's about the stadium. First, it was Rand Carthon's going to come in here. He's going to collaborate with Vrabel, and they're going to pick up right where they left off, and we're going to be competitive. And then they were worse. They were 6-11 instead of 7-10. Vrabel gets fired. They spent a bunch of money in the offseason, and it's like, well, now we're going to have a team that's good enough to compete. And they were even worse. They were 3-14. So then it turned into, well, we just want to get a team ready for the stadium. We're not going to be very good this year. Chad Brinker's already told us that, but we just want to be good enough when we get into the new stadium. Brinker on the preseason broadcast talked about stacking draft classes, which, again, this was a guy who was talking about wanting, I think it was 30 picks over the next 3 drafts, and he's not even going to be around for draft number 3. But it was about stacking draft classes so that when they move into the new stadium, they'll have a good team. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we know that they're not going to be very good when they move into the new stadium. I'm sorry, it is what it is. They're just not going to be very good. And so maybe I think they'll probably win about 6 or 7 games this year. So there won't be this huge buzz moving into the new stadium. But I think the goalposts are now going to move to that Super Bowl. And so this upcoming season, when it doesn't look like they're going to compete anytime soon, they'll say, well, it's okay because we're really building towards 2029. Because even though it's the 2030 Super Bowl, it's the 2029 season. I think we can all agree Cam Ward needs to be good enough to get you to the Super Bowl by then. I think we can all sit there and say that is kind of the line of demarcation, that when they drafted Cam Ward number 1 in 2025, that they were saying he will be good enough to lead us to the promised land by 2029 when we have the Super Bowl. And I think even the strongest Cam boys out there, the most ardent Cam Ward supporters, can sit there and say, yeah, in today's game, you need to be good enough to get the team to the Super Bowl by your 5th year in the league. Which the Titans will have to decide that after next year because they'll have to pick up a 5th-year option. So that is now going to be the new target that they're going to circle. And if this year goes poorly, everybody's going to get fired. Maybe even Cam. But I think now we're going to hear the internal target from the Titans, which has been new stadium, new stadium, new stadium, new stadium. I think that's now going to go to 29, 29, 29, 29, because again, 29 is when we're hosting the Super Bowl. The problem is if Cam's not that guy, and I don't think Cam is that guy, but if Cam is not that guy, he would have to have such an abysmal season this year in order for them to move off of him after year 2. You don't move off the number 1 overall pick after 2 years. That it's going to at least be into next year, into 2027, before they decide whether or not Cam's their guy. And if you decide after 27 he's not your guy, you're starting all over again. And your options are really, do you go the Daniel Jones route or do you go the pick a quarterback in the first round again route? And neither. I know Sam Darnold went to the Super Bowl. That was a unique situation. You know that I begged for Sam Darnold, and I don't think Sam Darnold would have had the Titans in the Super Bowl. But you do know that is incredibly difficult to get figured out, especially when you're constantly firing everybody every year. And I think this GM is going to be on the hot seat and in this upcoming season because he went all in on this quarterback. He pushed out the other guy that he was working with to make it all about him. And now they're going to want to see some results. But if there's a saving grace for him, I think it may be that they're going to move the target to 2029. So that's the second thing. Boy, that Ramon Foster stuff kind of took off the other day, eh? Holy crap. So Kaharski reported on Friday that Ramon Foster was going to be the next radio analyst of the Tennessee Titans. And when I saw that, I was upset. I wasn't shocked. Like I wasn't floored. I can't believe it, but I was a little surprised. Because even though Ramon had been doing sidelines for Titans radio, and even though Ramon is on the flagship station of the Tennessee Titans, 104.5 The Zone, he never played for the Tennessee Titans. And that usually is kind of the only prerequisite, it feels like, that these color analysts on the radio jobs have, is that you played for the organization, which, of course, Ramon Foster did not. And so on Friday, I just said, wow, that's a slap in the face. That is a slap in the face to Keith Bullock, who openly wanted the job. I think that's a slap in the face to Blaine Bishop, who's on that channel. I think it's a slap in the face to guys like Derek Mason and Chris Sanders. I think it's a slap in the face to a whole lot of people, maybe even the entire Titans alumni base. Now, I didn't expect that would get picked up, and damn, it did. Awful announcing. I was here in New Hampshire, and Chad Withrow texted me, and it was awful announcing. I'm like, oh, what is it? Jared Stillman? Again, we've been getting some press pickups and things like that because of the Vrabel Dianna stuff. I didn't think we'd get something picked up on the Titans. But as you can see, awful announcing picked it up of us talking about how I think it's a slap in the face to the Titans alums. And the more I've talked over the weekend with people about this Ramon Foster situation, the more I think there's kind of a conclusion that I've come to that this has really hurt the feelings of the alumni of this team. And I think it's even hurt the feelings of alumni on this team or of this team that really weren't interested in calling the games or really weren't even interested in being asked to call the games. But it's just a, wow, that's what you think of us as a whole? I mean, I talked to somebody in the media and I showed them the awful announcing story where it's, Jared Stillman says it's a slap in the face. And the person in the local media said back to me, boy, I tell you, that's how the players certainly feel about it. That's how the Titans alum feel about it. Now, I'm surprised Keith Bullock hasn't said anything publicly. I don't think anybody said anything publicly. I'm guessing D-Mace on his show. I don't know Blaine's on the same time we're on. I don't know what Blaine's going to say. I don't know what Blaine thinks. I don't know what D-Mace thinks. I haven't talked to D-Mace about this. I don't know what he's going to say on his show. But it really is disrespectful to the fans and to the alumni base that you hired somebody who didn't play for the Titans. And my biggest takeaway, I've already voiced that opinion. And I said, look, if it were me, I would put a list together. I'd entertain a lot of different options. I would be biased towards Chris Sanders, but I would certainly be willing to have discussions with other people. We'd have tryout, we'd have meetings with Taylor Zarzour and everybody else to get this all figured out. But it would be a Titan. It would be a Bullock. It would be a Mike Munchak, of saying, hey, let's bridge the gap here. It would be a Ryan Tannehill. Hey, would you have any interest in doing this job? It would be a Taylor Lewan. Hey, you can still do bussing with the boys. We don't care. We just want you to call the games, and then we'll have a couple events a year that we want you to be a part of and we want you to analyze. I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of different people you could have talked to. I would have loved to have sat down with Neil O'Donnell and said, Neil, would you have interest in this? Of course, there's Jason McCourty. And so I think that this is some clown shit stuff, that the Titans, what I think happened is I think the Titans, in unison with 104, said, what are we going to do? And I think 104.5 said, well, Ramon, he calls the games for the Vols, so he has a little experience doing that. Although I'm not the biggest fan of Ramon on UT's broadcast. Ramon, he calls some of the games there. He's on our station. Let's do that. And the Titans said, sure, I don't see anything wrong with that. And I think it's a little disappointing that there wasn't somebody in the room that said, how about the fact that Ramon never played for the Titans? How about that? That seems to be kind of an issue. But that was more of a Friday thing. Just the disappointment in the fact that the Titans hired a non-Titan to call their games. Today's topic is, I'm kind of getting tired with how clown shit I feel like the Nashville media has become about a lot of this stuff. For instance, Ron Slay sent out a tweet on Friday night, and I don't even totally understand what he meant by it. I got the gist of it. It was something along the lines of writing names down now to see who's with us or who's not. And I'm like, really? So by saying that Ramon Foster never played for the Titans and the guy who calls Titans games should play for the Titans is now a personal attack? And that is what has become of this local media that just truly disgusts me. When I say Ramon Foster shouldn't be the color analyst calling Tennessee Titan games, it's not a personal attack on Ramon. But there's Ron Slay. He's taking it personally. Ron Slay actually, I went over there and said, hey, at the Super Bowl. And Ron Slay was all like, oh, I don't mess with you. And I was like, what? And Don Davenport was like, yeah, he's really loyal. I said, loyal to who? And he was like, what you said about my brother. And I was standing there at the Super Bowl and I'm like, your brother? And all I could think about in my head is I knew that Slay had a brother who had passed away. And I sent my condolences when he passed away. And it was very tragic. And I'm like, at this point, I'm thinking, whoa. I didn't say anything about that other than I was thinking about you. And then that's when Buck told me, he was like, no, like Ramon Foster is Ron Slay's brother. I said, no shit. I was like, well, that interview that they did was terrible. And that's not personal. I was talking about the Rand Carthon one. That's not personal. That's like saying a player stunk. And when I say that the Titans should hire a color analyst who's not a Pittsburgh Steeler, but is a Tennessee Titan, that's not personal when it comes to Ramon. But I guarantee you, everybody's afraid to say it. Everybody's afraid to voice their opinion because they're afraid of dealing with the ramifications. And this is a bigger topic than just Ramon Foster that's starting to drive me crazy. But this is the reality of the Nashville media. I don't understand it. For instance, has anybody written a story about what happened to Chad Brinker? About how Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi were aligned at the hip, that Brinker was Borgonzi's handpicked guy. He chose Borgonzi over his buddy John Eric Sullivan from the Packers because he thought Borgonzi was the best guy. And then all of a sudden, In the middle of the season, Mike Borgonzi is calling Chad Brinker a cap guy. He's calling his boss a cap guy. And then right at the end of the season, Brinker is going to take a reduced role just voluntarily. And then as soon as the draft's over, Brinker leaves. And there's not a single story into that about what happened there. Again, I told you guys in September, I had a source telling me that there was friction between Brinker and Borgonzi. Then there was the press conference when they fired Callahan, and the two men had totally different dispositions at that press conference. Then Borgonzi called Brinker a cap guy. Then I went to the Super Bowl, and I reported this, I believe, which was, man, there was a lot of talk about Chad Brinker at the Super Bowl, about Brinker buddying up to people in the national and local media, and to me, it looked like there was a war coming, and that Brinker was going to try to find a landing spot that wasn't the Titans. In fact, I said that Amy was essentially firing Brinker when they demoted him for this terrible season that they had last year, and the Titans told me, that's bullshit, that's not true. And now he's gone. But there hasn't been a single story about that, has there? The Tennessean, even PK's website. PK keeps hinting at something, and I'm just like, Paul, just say it. He keeps hinting at this grand structure the Titans introduced a couple years ago. Was it really the grand structure of how NFL jobs have to operate nowadays? That you have to have somebody to handle all the extra crap because the general manager can only do general manager things like players and coaches? Or was that bullshit and Rand Carthon needed a babysitter? Well, I told you all at the time, Rand Carthon needed a babysitter. That's why they did it. And everybody got mad at me. I'm not the only person who saw it that way, but I'm the only person who said it. Remember, even Paul waited until Rand was fired before he dropped his hit piece on Rand. I don't do that. I told you guys, somebody in the building told me that Rand Carthon likes to play general manager more than he actually likes to be general manager. And I got called racist. I mean, Kaharski's sitting here saying, hey, Brinker did a good job with analytics, even though the team sucks. He did a good job, really, because his handpicked analytic guru, Sarah Bailey, just got fired. Is anybody writing about that? Mike Borgonzi went 3-14 last year. Aaron Glenn went 3-14, and he is on the barbecue seat every single day. Anytime Aaron Glenn opens his mouth in New York, there's like a political investigation into it of, wow, what the hell are the Jets doing? What is Aaron Glenn doing? And yet the Nashville media, has anybody other than me brought up the reality that Mike Borgonzi, after a 3-14 season in which Cam Ward had the worst QBR in the NFL, is definitely on the hot seat? I mean, what are we doing? Why is it controversial in this town to say, I think that the guy who calls the games for the Titans should have at one point played on the Titans? I get the amount of people in the media and the amount of Titan alumni that this weekend were all pissed off about it, and yet nobody will voice it except for me and to a certain extent Paul. Is not an indictment of the Titans, which traditionally these things are indictments of the Titans. To me, it is an indictment of our media and our society. Why is everybody so afraid to just say what the truth is? The Titans this morning are sending out tweets. Happy birthday, Craig Hentrick. Happy birthday, Vince Young. And Craig Hentrick was a great Titan. And Vince Young had his good moments. But what you're doing when you send out a birthday tweet for all your alums is you're trying to say, hey, happy birthday, Craig Hentrick. We still want you a part of it. You're still a part of us. You're still a Titan. You're still with us. We still love you. We still. And then you hire a Pittsburgh Steeler to call the games? That doesn't make any sense. If I was a Titan alum, I'd be furious about this. I'm not even a Titan alum, and I'm furious about this. And so, I mean, I think what I'm trying to say, the problems with the Titans, I'm a big believer that how you do one thing is how you do everything. The problems with the Titans, and I have been blasting these out of my trap for years. They're very obvious if you know the people involved and if you follow it on a daily basis the way that people like me follow it. It's my job. I know what the problem is, and I know how to fix it. But when I tell you guys, hey, you need to clean house with Vrabel and Rand Carthon and bring in somebody experienced, and nobody else in the local press will ever get on board with that because they're afraid to say what they really believe, it feels like, on a consistent basis. And this Ramon Foster thing is just another example of that. The Titans do something so incredibly incompetent, something that no other team in the league, I don't think, does. They hired a Pittsburgh Steeler. Bud Adams would lose his shit if he knew that they hired a Pittsburgh Steeler to call their games. And yet, the reason they did it is because they want to control the message. And so you get the guy who's very controllable, has proven that in the past by asking Rand Carthon about Kendrick versus Drake instead of Chad and Amy. And then you now control that morning show. And you also can kind of control Ramon because he's shown that he'll be controllable. And I don't know Ramon Foster. I don't think he's very good on the radio. I really don't think he's a very good game analyst. But I would say what probably bothers me the most about Ramon is how fake I feel like he is. And what I mean by that is Ron Slay gets all mad that anybody will say anything bad about Ramon. But I've had 2 radio partners over 10 years. One of whom I named my son after. The other, I officiated their wedding. That's how close I was with Floyd and Caroline. One time during COVID, I got a call and they said, hey, we're going to have to move on from Floyd. And I said, what? And they said, yeah, we just can't afford Floyd anymore. Because COVID, everybody was pulling their advertising. We were all taking pay cuts, but it was like, we can't afford Floyd. And I knew Floyd was making more than me. I was doing okay, but I wasn't making a ton of money at the time. And I reached out to the general manager and I said, they basically asked me, who would you want to be your co-host if we moved on from Floyd? And I'll just admit it. I cried like a bitch that night. I was so sad. I called the general manager up and I offered to take a pay cut. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And then I believe Floyd worked out a pay cut with the radio station. Ultimately, it didn't matter because 3 months later he got sick. But that happened. And I can't tell you how upset I was at the idea of Floyd being dumped from the show. And if it had gotten to the point where they had actually dumped Floyd, I would have had a really hard choice to make. And I don't know which one I would have made. I think there's a part of me that would have said, Floyd, let's figure this out on our own. And with Caroline, when she came to me and she told me about the Yahoo job, I told her she had to take it. The opportunity, the money, the platform. I was like, you have to take that job. Because I feel like that was the relationship that we had, that, we kept it real with each other. And I felt like I always protected her. I kept her from making a career decision that I don't think would have been a great career decision for her. I think she would have been fine no matter what, but I didn't tell her what to do. I just told her my opinions. And that was the relationship we had. I don't think Jason Martin and Kayla Anderson can say the same thing about Ramon. I can go on and on and on and on and on about how much my former co-hosts have meant to me. And that includes Drew Diener in Louisville. I mean, this morning I was with Chris Ryan. Chris Ryan hired me at WKXL. And boy, was I a pain in his ass for the year that I worked with him. But I absolutely love that man. And we have a great relationship. And I don't think Ramon had those kind of relationships with Jason Martin and Kayla Anderson. You'd have to talk to them. Those are their stories to tell. And so I guess I'm just all upset that when the Titans do something stupid, I feel like people are afraid to call it out for what it is. And this is an example of the Titans doing something incredibly stupid. And there should be backlash, and the alums should be very upset. And I don't know if this got to Amy. Like, I don't know if they decided, hey, we're going to hire Ramon Foster, let's tell Amy, or if Amy found out the same way everybody else did from Kaharski on Twitter. But if I was Amy, I'd be pissed about this. Because now I'm the one who has to deal with it when an alumni is upset or doesn't want to come to an event or whatever it may be. When it feels like they're being disrespected, it feels like I, the owner of the team, is the one disrespecting them. And now that just created a whole other problem that you didn't even have to have. Here's what I think is going to happen. This is a called shot here. I think the Titans are going to hire a third man in the booth. Not because they were planning to hire a third man in the booth, but because of the outrage. So I think what they're going to do is they're going to hire somebody like Jason McCourty. So McCourty calls 6 or 7 games for CBS a year. The weeks that he's not calling a CBS game, McCourty will be in the booth with Ramon Foster and Zarzer. That is my prediction, because I think this is a bad look. And I think this is something that the Titans alumni are going to be upset about for a long time. The fans will get over it soon enough. I do think it's something the alumni are going to be really upset about. Okay. Don't think I forgot about Vrabel and Russini, did you? So, we have a little nugget, courtesy of the New York Post. You know, the New York Post that dropped the original story. And the headline was a page 6 picture this week, Dianna Russini looking cozy with her and carefree at dinner with hubby amid scandal with Patriots coach Mike Vrabel. And I don't need to read you the whole report, but I'm just going to sum it up for you. So basically what the New York Post said was they had people that took a picture of Dianna Russini, and Dianna was with her husband and some other friends, and I guess they were out to dinner before the Bruce Springsteen concert at Madison Square Garden, which congratulations to them. You know, that's a great show. I'm not a Bruce Springsteen guy, but I know a lot of people out there are. And so that's probably a very, very popular concert. So Dianna, her husband, their friends, they're going, you know, what married people do. I got to say, to me, this is one of 3 things. I am stunned when I saw the report in the Daily Mail that he was thinking about taking her back, but he just felt so emasculated. I'm like, dude, everybody and their grandma knows you're not going to take her back. You cannot take her back. Not after all the things she heard in Stu Gatz and ESPN and how long this affair was. And she was pregnant with your kid on the boat with Vrabel. There's no way you could possibly take her back. Then there was the Mother's Day kissy photo. And I saw that. And when it came out, I was in Toronto last. I was like, what? What? This kissy photo? And everybody apparently thinks that it was staged. They're like, no. The kissy photo, that was staged. That was, you can look at it. He looks like it's staged. Caroline told me she thinks it's staged. I don't know. I can't tell you it was staged or not. I just saw the photos. They were kissing. And if she had done that to me, I wouldn't be smooching her. So I've decided that this is one of 3 things. And I do care about this, even though it is none of my business. I do care. I am emotionally invested in this story now. What happens with Dianna Russini and Kevin Goldschmidt, even though Dianna Russini's career is practically over, and I don't know Kevin Goldschmidt from a jar of Vicks. It has nothing to do with Vrabel. It's like, you know, I guess I'm just curious now. I think it's one of three things. And I think it could be any of these three things. Number one, he's taking her back because he's afraid to move on. That even though she's embarrassed him in so many ways, even though this will follow her and him and their marriage for forever, he just can't do it. He just can't cut the cord to the relationship. He probably justifies it by the fact that they have kids and they want their kids to grow up together but I'll just tell you in my experience, when it comes to the kids, usually in the end, they just want what's best for the parents. They want what makes the parents happiest, I believe. The second thing is he's into cuckolding. That, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a chair here in the corner of the hotel room, and that he likes to sit in the chair. And I don't know anybody who's into that personally, but I do think that if any of my friends were into that, I don't know how pervasive that is. Like, what is it? 25%, 10%, 5%? I don't know. None of my friends have ever told me that they've sat in a chair and watched their wife get it. But I also think even if they were that way, they would be afraid to say it. So maybe that's what he's into. I mean, you are what you like. I mean, you like what you like. Here, I'm going to Google this. What percentage of men are into cuckolding? No. The first thing that comes up says 66% of, non-heterosexual men. I don't care about that. I care about I think this is all about gay guys, though. I mean, I'm talking about just like 100% of men. The gay guys, the non-gay guys, the straight guys, the bisexual guys. Okay, so I'm just going to read it. Business Insider. An estimated 45% of American men have fantasized about their female partners having sex with another man while they 45%? I mean, I was thinking like 10. 45%? Really? Hey, whatever floats your boat, man. That's 45% of men are into watching their wives or their female partners, according to Business Insider, sleep with another man. Now, I don't think, does this count like men that are okay with like sleeping with another woman while their wife watches? Because I think that there's a lot more guys that would be okay with that than would be okay with the other one. I mean, hey, I guess it's a 50-50 shot that he's that way. If it's 45%, I can't believe that. That cannot be true. I digress. That's the second possibility. The third possibility is that it's fake. And so there were people that were saying, oh, it's so fake. The pictures in the New York Post, it's like a clear shot of Dianna. They did this on purpose. And I'm not going to accuse them of that. I am going to say the dog and the car crash story it felt very planted. We know Diana's working with a PR strategist, a crisis PR person. It's like the Neil Mink of this stuff, I guess. But I don't know which one it is. It's one of the three. Either he took her back because he's afraid to let her go. He never had a problem with it because he's one of the apparently 45% of men that are into watching their wives sleep with other men. Or it's fake. And I don't know which one it is. Drop a comment. Tell me which one you think it is. And finally, today on the program, I want to take a trip down memory lane. So I am here in Concord, New Hampshire. It's a small town. It's the capital of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a very small state. very important state politically, but it's a very small state here in New England. And this is where I got my start. So Dave Bonner passed away on May 6th. Dave Bonner got me my first job. If you remember Matt Bonner, the former San Antonio Spur, played at Florida. Matt Bonner's sister, Becky, was the director of operations at Louisville when I was a manager. I essentially worked for her, and she is one of my 5 to 10 closest friends on this planet to this day. And Becky had a stomach issue my freshman year. I think I can say that publicly. She had a stomach issue my freshman year at Louisville. She ended up in the hospital. And when she was in the hospital, I went to go visit her. Her dad was in town. That's when I met Dave. And Dave was always nice to me, but he was always nice to everybody. And Dave was the kind of guy who was like, anything I can do to help, I will. And that he put me in connection with Chris Ryan at WKXL, and Chris Ryan hired me and gave me my first job. And when I moved here to New Hampshire, I didn't know anybody really except for Dave. And it was a huge culture shock at 23 years old, moving to a state and a part of the country I had never lived in, not knowing a soul outside of Dave, and starting my career. And so yesterday they had the celebration of life in the morning, and then today was the burial. And yesterday I decided to just kind of go around to the old places when I lived here and worked here for a year and was doing morning news. So I would read off the wire every morning. 2 people were injured in a car accident along in Hooksett along the exit 7. Blah, 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 blah. And in other news, President Obama today announced that blah, 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 blah. And then I would do an hour of sports at night. And it was one of the most influential periods of my career and of my life, because that was the first time that I was ever truly on my own. I remember I would go to restaurants by myself while I was here in New Hampshire. I never went to restaurants by myself. I didn't really know anybody. And so I would go to restaurants by myself, and you know what? I kind of liked it. It was like, hey, this isn't bad. I went to a movie by myself the first time I was out here. And so yesterday I took a trip over to the old radio station and took a picture. That is the WKXL studios here in Concord, New Hampshire. And I sent that to Caroline, and Caroline was like, now that looks like a dilapidated barn. And it is kind of a dilapidated barn. But it was my dilapidated barn. That was where I got my career started. Every morning at about 5 a.m., I'd roll in there, pitch black. It'd be snowing everywhere. And that place, man, it was, you think it looks bad from the outside, go inside. But we had a good time. And I learned a lot. And it allowed me to figure out what I wanted to be. It gave me the avenue to really decide what career path I wanted to go on. I lived in the city of Manchester, which is about 20 minutes away. Yesterday, I took a drive up to Manchester, and there's an area of town called Elm Street. And that's where I lived. I lived in a really nice apartment complex on Elm Street. And Elm Street, I used to joke, was like a mini Broadway because there were all these different restaurants and bars. And then there was the arena down at the end. And the arena's a small arena because, again, we're in New Hampshire. But I used to walk to all these restaurants. I used to eat at all these restaurants. Yesterday I went to a restaurant I really loved called Ignite. And I went there, I sat down at the bar, I got the menu, and I was like, I'm just not hungry for any of the food that's on this menu, but I wanted to come here just for old time's sake. I took a picture of a bar called McGarvey's that's on Elm Street. And the reason I took a picture was because I'll never forget, I was single at the time. And I just moved to this new city. And I don't know why, but I remember getting on the plane, flying to New Hampshire for the first time and thinking to myself, I may meet my wife there one day. I was 23, and for some reason I was thinking I was going to live there for 20 years, which was crazy. I lived there for like a year. And I was single, and I was at this bar late at night one night at McGarvey's. And I can't believe I'm going to tell this story, but fuck it. Try to think of the right way to say this. There's some very pretty women that live in New England. But there's also a lot of women that aren't pretty that live in New England. And this, when it comes to a culture shock, this was the first time that I was like, this ain't Nashville, Tennessee, or Louisville, Kentucky anymore. So I'm at this bar, McGarvey's. And it's your typical New England pub. They're all, it feels like, your typical New England pubs. And so I'm at McGarvey's. It's late at night. And this bigger woman who certainly was not a looker comes up to me and asks me to buy her a tequila shot. Now, I'm like, 5 or 6 drinks in. It's late at night. Okay, fine. I'll get you a tequila shot. So we started talking, and she looks at me and goes, you're going to have to do a lot more, in like a Boston accent, You're going to have to do a lot more to try to get my attention or something like that. And I remember just looking at it being like, we are not in Kansas anymore. And just that kind of culture shock. And when I walked by McGarvey's yesterday, I thought about that, about how even though I was like a 2-hour flight away from home, I felt like when I lived here, I felt like I was in another country. Like a basketball player that was good enough to play overseas, but not good enough to play in the NBA. And when I would cover the Bruins, the Celtics, the Red Sox, the Patriots, I always saw how all the Boston guys were treated. And I was like, man, that feels like the big leagues. And I always wanted to be in the big leagues. But I was in like single A or double A. And I would say that, the two influences that have probably had the strongest influences on my broadcasting career, and this isn't because I know them or anything, but just from watching them, and would be Colin Cowherd and Mike Felger in Boston. And it was because I lived in New Hampshire that I was essentially in Boston and followed the New England teams and everything else. And there was something about that trip yesterday down memory lane, walking up and down Elm Street and seeing the spots that were still there. There's a cigar bar called Castro's. That's still there. And seeing the spots that aren't there anymore. A barbecue restaurant, very good. I would compare it to Martin's, a barbecue restaurant called The Farm that was right across the street from my apartment complex. The Farm signage is still there, but it's gone and the building is for lease. And it just reminded me of how fast life goes by. And how even those moments where we're the most uncomfortable. Because when I lived in New Hampshire, I was incredibly uncomfortable. I mean, it was a totally different climate, different kind of people, different type of job, different everything. And yet, I really enjoy it up here. I mean, especially this time of year, it's beautiful. And this weekend, the weather was fabulous. But it really kind of hit me just how big of an impact that stop had on my career. And it hit me going and seeing the old studio and going and seeing the Barley House in Concord and the Red Arrow Diner that I used to go to. And there was this really crappy buffet that closed up called the Red Apple Buffet. And I saw the sign for that yesterday. I drove by it, wasn't going to go there, but I just wanted to. And I saw that the signs were still there, but the building is falling apart. And it just reminded me of my career and the journey. And how thankful I am, not only for Dave Bonner and his family, who is going to miss him so much, but just how thankful I am for this journey. And how each stop along the way is unique in its own right, but it's what made me the broadcaster and the guy that I feel like I am today. And so I leave New Hampshire today. I'll drive to Boston. I'll fly out of Boston. I'll be home tonight, get to see my son. We'll be back at the Stillman & Company studios tomorrow, but I vow this is not going to be the last time that I ever come to New Hampshire, because boy, New Hampshire meant a lot to me. That'll do it for us. Like and subscribe. We'll be back tomorrow. Stillman and Company, 2 o'clock, right here on the 440 Sports Network.